So you're here. So that means you're watching another episode of The Kickout. And on this episode, I am going to do what I love the most. I love video games, and everybody that knows me knows that I love doing that. So on this edition, it's going to be a special one because I actually want to talk about the 5 best video games that you can actually play. Let's get to it. All right, so let's get into it. A lot of people know that I'm a big time gamer, and as I grew up, I played almost every single wrestling game that you can think of. I want to say that I really started playing wrestling games around Nintendo 64. Played some on the PlayStation 1. I didn't really play any on Super Nintendo, regular Nintendo, or anything of that nature. But I did play them a lot growing up. But it was more in the mid '90s when I started picking that up. And but to get more into it, I spent probably more time playing wrestling games than I did anything else. And, played them all the time with my brother. I didn't really have anybody else that played wrestling video games when I grew up. So I played a lot of single player. So a lot of that became just me and my brother playing them all the time against each other, which I will say he gives me the best run that I can think of anybody else that I've ever played. He's the only person that I know that has, beat me when I was Bill Goldberg. I used to be a huge Goldberg fan, and nobody ever beat me when I was him. And then Dylan finally did it on a random game of, I believe it was 2K19 when we did it. He eventually beat me, and I remember I was more shocked than pissed that I lost because it just never beat me, and I went in there pretty confident. Going against him. And, Dylan's favorite wrestler is the Macho Man Randy Savage. So when we got in there, I was like, I ain't worried about it. I'm going to beat him. But you know what? I give props where props is due. And I never, ever really say good job to him or anything. So I actually want to do it on the show right now. And Dylan, good job beating me, a year and a half ago. Using Macho Man Randy Savage when I was using Goldberg. You're the man. I'll give it to you. But let's go ahead and get into the countdown. So my number 5, I actually was going to say 2K19, and that's just because that's the most time the most time I've spent on a video game with my brother, just playing constantly. But that's going to be my honorable mention. But my number 5 is going to be Day of Reckoning for the GameCube. Me and my brother played the hell out of that game. And it was super cool because you could you went to these levels and you would beat up construction workers and stuff like that, and actually move through levels. And it was super different. I actually really liked the gameplay style too. The gameplay style actually for me, I thought was super great. The way that at that time it was super realistic and super cool, and everybody had their own move set, and it felt just cool and real. And you don't want to say real because it's a GameCube, but at the time it did feel real and it felt special. And that I want to say that was one of the few games that I ever played on the GameCube wrestling-wise. I never really played much of the GameCube, but when I did, it was other stuff. We played a lot of Dragon Ball Z, but not much wrestling. I know there was a second one. We played that for a little bit, but we didn't really dive much into that. But if you have a GameCube and you like wrestling, give this one a chance. It's a pretty fun game. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I don't really have much to say about that one just because it doesn't hold up to the other 4 that are on the list. So if you get a chance, go out, play it, it's a pretty fun game. It's pretty awesome. So my number 4 is actually a game that I just found 2 weeks ago, and I am absolutely in love with it. And that's going to be Fire Pro Wrestling World. You can play that on the PC, and you can play it on the PlayStation 4. I actually don't have a PlayStation 4. I have a PC. So I just got a PC about 2 weeks ago, and that was the first game that I actually ended up buying for it. And what makes this game like super good and why it's even in the top 5 is the amount of creation that is in this game. You can literally think it and you can put it in the game. I already have like 6 or 7 different organizations on there. I have WWE, I have WCW, I have AEW, I have an Attitude Era, I have the Ruthless Aggression Era on there. They have their own little promotion that they have on there called the SWA, where they're kind of ass. If you're asking me, they're okay. But I've got wrestlers from the 70s. I even have wrestlers from the 80s, and then I have more wrestlers from the 90s. You can customize any title. You can put all their moves on them. You can do any of that. It's probably the most infinite wrestling game I've ever played. And that's saying a lot with the next 3 that are on here, because that game has so much. And I've sank, let's just put it this way. I had it for a week and I've put 57 hours into it. So that's almost, that's more than my job. I've put quite a bit in there, and you can do tournaments and stuff on there, league matches, which the only other game that I can remember, I can remember WCW NWO World Tour used to have league matches, but they weren't in depth like Fire Pro Wrestling World. So those were those were really great matches to do. Were league matches. They were pretty fantastic to put together, because then everybody does a round robin and everybody gets a chance to fight each other. It's not like a tournament where first loss you're out or anything, so you can lose and still come back and win. But so that's my number 4. Let's get into number 3. So number 3 is WWF No Mercy. I cannot tell you how much me and my brother used to beat the shit out of each other on this game. When I was growing up, though, I wasn't a big WWF guy. So when I got it, I was kind of like, meh. And I was just coming off of WWF 2000. I enjoyed WWF 2000, but I was way more into No Mercy. And the reason being is No Mercy was extremely customizable. It had a great setup. It was set up just like World Tour, Revenge, WrestleMania 2000. All those games had the same setup. So they were easily, like, they streamlined each other. And it was fun to go from one to the next, because there was great improvement from each game in the series. With No Mercy being number 3, it was really hard for me to put this below my second favorite game, and that's just because of what WWF No Mercy brought. It had a fantastic roster, and and on that one, they took everything from all the past games and incorporated all that stuff into this one. So it just made it that much better of a game. Like, that's at the pinnacle, almost at the pinnacle of gaming for wrestling. And it was for sure for the Nintendo 64. I didn't mention what it was on. That was on the Nintendo 64. And it was absolutely mind-boggling with the customization in that game. It was pretty great. But I'm going to go ahead and go into number 2, which they go hand in hand, which is WCW NWO Revenge. WCW NWO Revenge gets number 2 because it was the beginning of the series of those games. Actually, it was WCW NWO World Tour, but not many people played that one. The roster was kind of weird. They didn't have a lot of wrestlers in that. You had like Rey Mysterio, you had Dean Malenko, William Regal, Sting. You had your main characters, but some of the Japanese wrestlers in there, not many people knew who they were, but they were fan favorites, So Going to WCW NWO Revenge, again, it had a very fun customization, but it wasn't close to where WWF No Mercy was at. Revenge, I remember playing with Goldberg and Sting nonstop, and I would switch off with Psychosis, La Parka, Rey Mysterio. Well, basically the cruiserweights. We played with the cruiserweights a lot. I remember growing up, and my brother's dad used to beat the hell out of me, and I remember I used to take that anger, and I would go home and I would practice and practice and practice, and I never actually beat him in that game. But now I know if we went back and played, 20-something years later, I would kick his ass. But that's neither here or there. I'm just saying, kind of pissed me off that I got beat all the time as a child at that game. But yeah, I have to say WCW NWO Revenge was such a fun game to play. You didn't really have to worry about the learning curve wasn't really big. It was kind of simple, especially if you were a wrestling fan. If you played World Tour, you got right into Revenge. You didn't have much to worry about. You just went in there and killed it. But I'm going to have to say that I can't believe I put Revenge over No Mercy, but of course, I feel like that's the game that really kicked everything off. But we're going to go into number 1. There was no question in my mind putting this game number 1. And this game is Here Comes the Pain. Here Comes the Pain is the single greatest wrestling game that has ever been made. One of the best features of this game was the career mode that you could have on there. You could take any wrestler that is on the roster, and you could go through a career, and you could fight your way up through the ranks. Now, there was only 3 matches per show, which I thought was the weirdest part of it, but you could stop and go anytime you wanted. You could switch your wrestler whenever you wanted, and you wouldn't lose any progress. So if you played 150 matches with somebody like Chris Benoit, then that game would keep all the stats of what Benoit did. So it would keep up with his Hardcore Championship wins, his WWE title wins, his tag team title wins. You could do the same thing with cruiserweights. You could do the same thing with the main roster stars. You could switch shows. So the career mode was pretty nicely built. Another thing that made that game super appealing, the second best part of the game, was it wasn't a full-on simulation game. It was more of a arcade style too. I mean, the clotheslines were like kind of ridiculous at times, but it's what made it fun. It was probably the best game to play with friends besides WCW NWO Revenge and WWF No Mercy. If you ever wanted a wrestling game just to throw on and play with your friends, this was the game to do. And then, of course, the customization in this game was just, it was so good, so great. You could make anything you wanted. And to be fair now, if we're going to talk about customization, WWE 2K19 probably has the best customization of any wrestling game that's been put out when it comes to an actual character, rings, arenas, stuff like that. I mean, it's bar none. It's fantastic. But Here Comes the Pain. Here Comes the Pain was, again, the game that started it all for that era on PlayStation 2. I know people want to talk about Just Bring It and Shut Your Mouth and stuff like that. And I played those too, but those two games don't compare to Here Comes the Pain when it comes to gameplay, customization, career mode, and stuff like that. I mean, those other games had career modes, but you would play it for, an hour, and then you were done. But the career mode on Here Comes the Pain... Here Comes the Pain had a great career mode, and you could just play over and over again. And then going back and looking at your stats was really fun, because then you could see like how many times you've won the title. You want to go after Rick's 16-time world championships, and when you do it, you're like, oh, well, what do I want to do now? I mean, if you ever get a chance, though, get your PlayStation 2, get you Here Comes the Pain, and play the hell out of that game. And if you think you can beat me, let me know. If you think you can beat me at any of these games that I just mentioned, put it down below. Let me know that you have it, and I'll come over and I'll play you 1-on-1, 2-on-1, 2-on-2. It doesn't matter. I have my brother. We can come over and do tag matches too, and we will kick your ass. It's okay. It's what we do. We're pretty badass. But so like I said, this episode was going to be very different. It wasn't going to be like what you watch or anything. This one was video game based. But I really want to know what your top 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, you know how it goes, whatever. Tell me what your favorite video game of wrestling was. I really would like to hear that. And, you know, of course, if it's not Here Comes the Pain, you're wrong, but whatever. It's cool. But yeah, this was the kick out, and this was the edition of top 5 wrestling video games that I played. Later.